Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to absolutely shatter a really persistent historical myth. You know the one. The idea that early North America was just this sparsely populated, untouched wilderness right up until European contact. Well, we're going to look at the actual reality, which is a thriving, incredibly complex, and densely populated continent. We are talking about massive metropolises, brilliant feats of engineering, and sprawling political empires that literally rivaled anything happening on the exact same timeline over on the other side of the globe.
Okay, let's dive right into our itinerary for today. We'll start off with the power of surplus food, then head over to the Pacific Northwest to look at wealth distribution, down to the Southwest for some desert innovation, over to Cahokia, the Mississippian metropolis, down to Mesoamerica to talk pyramids and power, and finally, we'll tie the whole thing together with the interconnected continent.
All right, part one, the power of surplus food, or as I like to call it, the agricultural engine.
Now, to wrap our heads around these massive empires, we really have to ask ourselves a basic question. How did these early societies go from just surviving day to day to actually building sprawling civilizations? Well, the answer is surplus food. Specifically, the highly nutritious, honestly kind of magical crop we know as corn or maize. The slow but steady march of maize across the continent acted as the ultimate catalyst for civilization. Roughly 3,200 years ago, travelers and trade networks carried maize seeds from Mexico right into the U.S. Southwest. 1,000 years later, it pushed across the Great Plains to the east. And 1,000 years after that, it reached the far north. Corn became so absolutely vital that native communities built rich, foundational spiritual traditions all around it, like the Hopi stories of the spirit Muingwu growing corn directly from his body, or Maya accounts of gods literally mixing corn and water to create the very first humans.
It basically boils down to this really simple, undeniable equation. Surplus food equals societal power. Think about it. When you have a reliable, super nutritious food source like corn, you just don't need as many hands in the dirt for basic day-to-day survival. And when you free up your population from that constant, exhausting foraging, bam, you unlock the ability to pursue specialized, artistic, administrative, and spiritual activities. You can actually start to build advanced societies.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Pacific Northwest, wealth distribution, and life among the cedars.
So, that agricultural engine we just talked about, it perfectly sets the stage for the Pacific Northwest. Here, you had these incredibly dense populations living in a lush, resource-rich environment, and it created a political and social structure that was unlike anywhere else. Society here was centered around something called the potlatch. These were elaborate feasts that served as the beating heart of their political system. The crucial thing to understand here is that in this society, giving away wealth was the ultimate flex of power. Hosts would entertain guests with incredible food, stunning artwork, and performances. They would literally save up for decades just to host one extravagant potlatch. Why? Because the more they gave away, the more prestige, respect, and political clout they gained to manage conflicts and land claims.
So what did this world actually look like? Picture this. You've got these massive 30 to 60-foot longhouses crafted from this beautiful, rich, dark brown cedar, resting right on the banks of places like Puget Sound. Imagine indigenous hunters navigating giant red cedar canoes out into the open ocean to hunt whales and seals. Picture towering cedar poles, what we later called totem poles, intricately carved and painted to express kinship identities and tell these deep, multi-generational stories. And they were highly adaptable, too. When severe droughts hit and the salmon yields dropped, they didn't just give up. They creatively shifted their networks inland, heavily tending to prairies and harvesting camas roots just to survive the harsh winters.
Shifting gears to Section 3, the Southwest. Meet the desert innovators engineering the arid lands.
Now, let's look at the ancestors of today's Pueblo people, like the Hohokam, down near modern-day Phoenix, Arizona. They engineered some truly brilliant ways to tame the desert. Take a look at this number, 800. That's a staggering figure. We are talking 800 miles of trunk lines in the sophisticated clay irrigation canals built by the Hohokam. Using literally just clay and digging sticks, they managed to route river water directly into their gardens to grow what was known as the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. And by the way, that 800 miles, that doesn't even count the hundreds of miles of smaller branching canals. They completely transformed the desert into a massive agricultural engine.
And the architecture they built on top of that foundation, absolutely staggering. We're talking highly defensible stone cliff dwellings embedded directly into the sheer rock faces of Chaco Canyon. Consider Pueblo Bonito for a second, a residential structure 5 stories high, stretching over 2 whole acres, with 600 rooms decorated with copper bells and bright macaw feathers. They featured kivas, which were these dugout rooms for central cultural ceremonies, and they designed their homes to align perfectly with the path of the stars, the sun, and the moon. At its absolute peak, 15,000 residents lived in this complex, connected by hundreds of miles of intricate road systems. It's truly amazing. Ultimately, it was only a severe ecological challenge, a massive, prolonged drought around 1130 CE that forced them to finally disperse.
Which brings us to Section 4, Cahokia, the Mississippian metropolis and its great earthworks.
Let's move over to the American Midwest, just east of modern-day St. Louis, Missouri. Here we uncover a sprawling urban center that honestly completely defies what we typically expect from history. This comparison brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale we're talking about. Roughly 1,000 years ago, a city known as Cahokia peaked at a population of 30,000 people, sprawling across 2,000 acres. Cahokia wasn't just some village, it was a massive metropolis. Its population literally outpaced major European cities like London during the exact same time period. In fact, no city north of Mexico would match Cahokia's peak population until well after the American Revolution.
The architectural crown jewel of this entire city was Monk's Mound. This thing was a 10-story high, towering earthen hill that served as the center of the metropolis. And get this, the base of Monk's Mound was actually larger than the base of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. Let that sink in. Much like the builders in the Southwest, the people of Cahokia linked their ceremonial earthwork structures, and really life and death itself, directly to the movements of the stars and planets.
Now, you can't have a city of that size without some seriously complex social stratification. Mississippian society was actually organized into matrilineal chiefdoms, which means authority was inherited through maternal bloodlines. Women were incredibly empowered here, largely because they controlled the agricultural food production. We see famous figures emerge from this culture, like the Lady of Cofetechi, who commanded vast authority over her kingdom's food, its trade, and its weapons. This incredible stability led to a staggering 500% population boom in just one single generation around 1050 CE. Now, it's also important to clarify their economy. They did utilize slavery, particularly taking war captives. But unlike the later transatlantic slave trade, Native American slavery wasn't about holding people as permanent generational property. It was much more about replacing lost kin, and enslaved people could often become fully integrated members of the community through adoption or marriage, which was a way to grow political power.
All right, moving down to Section 5, Mesoamerica, pyramids, power, and the theocracies.
As we move southward into Mesoamerica, we hit these towering theocracies that birthed just massive religious, architectural, and scientific advancements. One of the absolute largest of these early corn-supported cities was Teotihuacan, located just northeast of modern Mexico City. This was a bustling, diverse hub of over 25,000 people. It featured the massive pyramids of the sun and moon. Imagine just walking up to these temples decorated with red and gold painted jade facades, featuring striking carvings of feathered serpent heads. The city was so grand, so awe-inspiring, that later peoples, including the Aztecs, literally considered Teotihuacan to be the birthplace of the gods.
And the descendants and successors in this region? Absolute brilliance. The Toltecs rose to power with incredibly rapid urban development, which was entirely made possible by a super stable, centralized government that expertly managed and controlled water. Further south, the Maya built spectacular city-states like Chichen Itza. Governed by a combined priesthood and nobility, their diverse genius gave the world a complex written language, highly advanced mathematics, and astronomical calendars that remain stunningly accurate even to this day.
Which leads us right into Section 6, an interconnected continent and the vast web of trade.
Okay, so we've looked at all these incredible regions, but here's the real secret, the big takeaway. None of these complex civilizations existed in isolated little bubbles. Not at all. Look at this data. It completely, utterly shatters the idea of a disconnected land. We're finding copper from modern-day Canada all the way down in Louisiana. We see sheets of mica from the northeast Alleghenies popping up in Ohio, obsidian from Montana near the Ohio River, turquoise from the American Southwest down in the pyramids of Mexico. The continent's rivers and roads with a humming, bustling highways of a truly vast continental economy.
So that naturally begs the question, if these civilizations were so incredibly complex, so heavily populated, and so powerful, what caused massive cities like Chaco Canyon and Cahokia to eventually collapse? Well, the answer usually lies in sudden, severe ecological challenges. We talked earlier about the persistent droughts that forced dispersal in the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. In Cahokia, researchers point to mounting internal political tensions, resource strain from environmental shifts, and increased warfare, which is heavily evidenced by the sudden, massive construction of defensive stockades around the city.
And that brings us to our final thought for today.
indigenous communities across early North America were deeply, deeply connected by kin, politics, culture, and long-distance trade. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder long after we finish here. How much of our modern world, our roads, our agriculture, our cities, still rests directly on the ancient highways and foundations built by these spectacular interconnected metropolises? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today, and as always, keep questioning what you think you know about history.